Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best of the best to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is Adam Dakin, the Healthtech Partner at Dreamit. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, delighted to be here, Mike. Thanks so much for the invitation.
And it's really a pleasure, especially after having your colleague that is leading the secure tech vertical, Mel Shakir. By the way, the ones who are not able to listen to that podcast and are interested in the cybersecurity space, that's a great episode to listen to. And I'm really excited to hosting you. You have co-founded 5 Healthtech companies already with Dreamit, according to my records of your LinkedIn. For almost 5 years, you are almost doing your 5th birthday in July. And it's a pleasure. You have an amazing track record in the space, but even more than me talking about you, why don't you introduce to the community?
Oh, well, I appreciate the kind words, Mike. Thanks. So yeah, 5-time co-founder. I was the CEO of 3 of those companies, raised venture money for all of them. A couple went pretty well. A couple were abysmal failures. One of them still keeps me up at night, and the jury's still out on the last one, sort of crossing fingers and hope we can get that one across the finish line. So yeah, I'm mostly an operator, 25 years of really operational experience. And then just as you said, 5 years ago, moved over to the investment side with Dreamit Ventures.
That's really awesome. And to tell us, Mel Shakir already shared a little bit your thesis on the previous show, but for the ones who are just listening to this show and more interested in Healthtech, let us know a little bit more about investment thesis, developer position of Dreamit, etc.
Sure. So Dreamit is a Philadelphia-based venture fund, though we invest all over the world. This is our 4th fund. Our focus, as you mentioned earlier, is really exclusively on 2 verticals, health tech and cyber tech. You already spoke to Mel about cyber tech. My team leads the health tech focus. For us, health tech is really software and healthcare IT and medical devices. Very limited there. We don't go beyond those 2 areas. So no drug discovery or compound development. Those sorts of things are really beyond our scope. Our focus is late seed Series A companies. These companies are in market with early sort of proof points around commercialization. They've typically raised some capital, not necessarily a lot, but some are bootstrapped. And they typically have at least a handful of referenceable customers. That's certainly true for the software platforms that we invest in. We go a little bit earlier on the device side because devices, you can get proof points a little bit earlier with clinical data and IP and key opinion leaders who are behind the product. What's really unique about our investment model is that we've built out a network now on the health tech side, which is approaching 100 partners who include payers and plans, large enterprise healthcare systems, and big pharma partners, and a few multinationals mixed in there as well. And these partners are kind enough to give us red carpet access to senior level decision makers within those organizations because they know we're bringing in the best of the best startups that solve big and urgent problems on their short list. So we're super selective. My team will look at well over 500 companies a year to find the 10 or 12 we work with. And then we only invest once they've gone through this process. We call them customer sprints. But huge value for a startup because, as you know, particularly, I'm sure this is true in other verticals, but in healthcare, especially, sort of post-pandemic, I guess we can call it post-pandemic, getting access to decision makers was always hard in healthcare. Now it's damn near impossible, right? How do you get a meeting with a chief nursing officer, a chief medical officer, the chief information officer? It's almost impossible to get in front of those folks, but we're fortunate because having developed these very warm relationships over the last 10 plus years, we get them to meet with our startups through this process we call customer sprints, where twice a year our partners are kind enough to listen to the pitches from those 5 or 6 startups that we may be working with any moment in time. And then we know what these partners are looking for. So we do a lot of prep work, curation of these meetings ahead of time on the customer side to make sure the right people are in the Zoom room and on the startup side to make sure their pitch is really tight, well rehearsed, and hitting the value props that we know are important to our customer partners. And we do something very similar on the investment side. We reach out to about 1,300 venture funds when our startups are raising. They also know how carefully selected and vetted these startups are, so they take a close look. And through that process, we're typically organizing somewhere between 25 and 40 one-on-one curated meetings with venture funds who have already been qualified with regard to the stage, the space, the size of the raise. You know, if they've opted in to meet with you, you know, it's a meeting with a qualified investor. So hyper efficient for startups to get access to institutional investors. Again, we spend a lot of time getting them game ready, rehearsing, making sure that the pitch decks are tight, because we know what investors are going to want to hear in that meeting. And our track record is really good. About half of our companies close an institutional raise shortly after getting through this process. It's all virtual. And we co-invest in the vast majority of those. To be clear, we don't lead rounds. So we're not setting terms. We're not taking board seats. We're just working like mad to help find you a lead investor, because the truth is, our model is we get a tiny bit of equity, advisor equity up front, but we make money as a venture investor. So if you don't scale, create value, and we don't invest in you, it's a loss for us, right? We've done a lot of work for not a lot of pay if we ultimately don't invest. And our typical check sizes, first check size is around 750, sometimes more, and then we reserve an equal amount or more for future rounds.
Got it. As the audience is global, even if the majority of the audience is based in the US, Dreamit is very US centric at this stage, right?
So yes, in the sense that our value add, we believe, is accelerating go-to-market strategies into the US market. So that doesn't mean you're necessarily a US company. We were early investors in a company called Informatica.
Got it.
Very cool platform, uses AI to triage patients to the right, direct patients to the right point of care. That's a Polish-based startup. Poland, as you probably know, has brilliant mathematicians and a ton of great AI technology. When we connected with Informatica, their focus was, okay, they were scaling nicely in Europe, but they're like, hey, we need some help figuring out how to enter the US market. That's where we came in. And we helped them get access to US-based customers and really inform their whole go-to-market strategy, which is, as you can imagine, because the payer system, the provider system is dramatically different in the US than it is in other places. You have to rethink your go-to-market strategy, because you can't just sort of replicate what you've done in other countries and assume it's going to work in the US market. So
even if you start in another region and you want to scale in the US, Dreamit is still a potential partner for that path and that journey.
I mean, we see ourselves as your scaling partner into the US market. You know, that could be enterprise healthcare systems, it could be payers and health plans, or it could be big pharma partners.
Love it. And you said you see how many companies a year, that you invest in 10, 12 companies every year?
Right. So we will look at over 500 startups to find those 10 or 12 that we're going to work with every year. So I always jokingly say it's twice as hard to get into Dreamit as it is to get into Harvard. Harvard has actually a 6% acceptance rate. The only school tougher to get into Harvard is Stanford, like a 5.5% acceptance rate.
Okay.
And we have about, call it a 3%, if I'm going to round up. We have about a 3% acceptance rate.
That's great. And which is awesome. You have a lot of exposure into the health system in general and the different decision makers, and also into the startups, which helps us to kind of bring the next topic of our conversation, which are, what are the trends and how do you envision the future of health tech, given your track record and what you have been seeing in the market?
So not surprisingly, we're super excited, even though there's certainly no shortage of problems and challenges that we need to address in the healthcare system. I think just one quick metric that highlights that is the fact that the US spends 19% of gross domestic product, GDP, on healthcare. That's actually
Mhm.
twice as much as the next
Wow.
closest developed country. That's the UK, that spends about 10%. Yet on almost any objective measure, we're not even in the top 10 on clinical outcomes. So if you
Mhm.
want to look at longevity, quality of life, infant mortality, um, I mean, just on almost any, incidence of chronic diseases, we're our results just don't justify this fact that we're not getting our money's worth. Let's put it that way, right? We're clearly not. And 20%, almost 20% of GDP on healthcare is not sustainable. Our economy can't continue to spend this kind of money. So what does that mean? That means we have to find a way to move the cost curve. We have to find a way to deliver better care at lower cost, right? This is no brilliant
Mhm.
insight. Everybody in
Right.
healthcare is well aware that, that this has to happen. So those sorts of the trends that are kind of riding this wave, some of them are pretty obvious. The shift to
Mhm.
virtual care is very obvious. The pandemic, that shift was already underway. The pandemic was just a catalyst, really, to moving more care outside of the brick and mortar of a hospital, because the overhead in a hospital, it's really doesn't make sense for a lot of simple, sort of low acuity procedures. Why are you doing those in a hospital setting when they could be done in an outpatient clinic or maybe even in your home?
Right.
However, to move those sort of acute sort of the acute care or those procedures outside of the hospital infrastructure, that's where technology comes in.
Mhm.
So if you want to deliver care in the home, as one example, you need technology to keep track of the patient. For example, we're investors in a company called Vitals. It's a device for tracking vitals, vital signs in the home. So lots of enthusiasm, lots of different use cases there, but if you're going to send patients home early after surgery, or if you're going to do procedures in the home, you're going to want to keep, it's pretty basic. You're going to want to keep track of the patient's vital signs, make sure they're doing
Right.
well. If early signs of complications, infections, other things, you want to pick up on those early before they exacerbate. That's where technologies come into play. Another company, we're investors in a company called Stell. Stell has a device, looks like a small nightlight that you plug into the wall. What
Mhm.
Stell does, it automatically pairs any single device that you send into the home. So that could be a scale, that could be a pulse oximeter, right? That could be a blood pressure cuff, you name it.
Got it.
But the burden shouldn't be on the patient to how to figure out how to connect and pair those things, right? We shouldn't be asking them to get on their cell phones and connect their scales to their Wi-Fi, particularly in the more elderly population that may not be tech savvy.
Yeah.
That's kind of an unfair burden to place on the patient. So we're excited about Stell because they automate that pairing. So that's kind of the pick, selling pickaxes to the miners, right? The infrastructure to enable remote care means you have to be able to connect devices in the home and communicate that data wherever the provider wants it to go in a format that's easily digestible for them. So,
Mhm.
that this shift to virtual care, again, no great insight here, but lots of platforms that are doing that. That ranges from the technologies that I just described, actual physical technologies, to information technologies, helping the clinician have a more enriched telehealth visit, right? Surfacing information in real time when that doctor's speaking with the patient, so they have all the critical information they need right in front of them on a moment's
Mhm.
notice. That we mine the electronic health record to surface key insights that will drive the appropriate interventions that the clinician thinks are appropriate for the patient. And then another kind of big area that I think has, again, been accelerated by the pandemic is what you often hear called the consumerization of healthcare. And there are many components to the consumerization of healthcare. It starts with the fact that, as we all know, consumption of healthcare is not a very satisfying experience.
Right.
Anybody who's had a loved one in the hospital in the United States knows it's not fun. In fact, it's incredibly frustrating because it's I mean, it starts with the information flow. It's very hard to find out
Mhm.
what's going on, what's being done to your loved one, what the clinical process, protocol, treatment plan is going to be. Once you have that, how do you keep track of it? Do you know if the right things are being done? So there's That's on the patient side. The experience just isn't very good. On the provider side, 50% of doctors say they're burned out and contemplating leaving
Right.
healthcare. So we have to make this a better experience for the providers, or they're just not, we're already grossly understaffed. I mean, nursing staff shortage is a freaking crisis in the United States. Again,
Mhm.
that's driving costs. Hospitals having to hire travel nurses at 2 to 3 times the cost, of a traditional full-time nurse employee.
Right.
That's not sustainable either. Um, so we have a company we're excited about called Park and RN. It enables sort of more efficient
Mhm.
virtual telehealth engagement with patients. But in the consumerization of healthcare, I mean, think about when we consume healthcare, we don't really know what we're getting. We're not sure what that basket of goods and services is. We don't really know what it costs. I had
Mhm.
a shoulder surgery a few years back. I had no idea what that shoulder. I tried to find out. Good luck. Try calling a hospital and asking what your procedure is going to cost and what your copay is. Or try calling your insurance company and saying, I'm having your shoulder operation. How much of this is on me? Good luck. I mean, I got a bill after that surgery from an anesthesiologist who I never remember even meeting. And I said, well, I already paid my copay and my insurance company already paid for the operation. It's like, oh yeah, but the anesthesiologist bill is totally separate and you got to pay for that. It's like,
Wow.
what? This was never discussed with me. I never
Right.
became aware of this. So, there's legislation now, the no surprise legislation that's now in place so that you
Mhm.
can't do this to patients anymore. But, that's also fairly nuanced in terms of how it works. But bottom line is, when you think about your Amazon experience, it's the complete opposite of your healthcare experience because you go to Amazon, you
Right.
know exactly what you're getting, you know exactly what it costs, and you have a
Yeah.
pretty good sense of the quality based on the crowdsourced information from all the other people who've used that product, right? It's
Yeah.
complete opposite of healthcare where all of those things are completely opaque. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they're
Mhm.
mostly opaque. You don't know what you're getting when you buy healthcare. So again, platforms that make that data more transparent and improve the experience for both patients and providers
Yeah.
um, are huge opportunities for startups.
Yeah, amazing trends. I also enjoy this typical paradox that we face in Healthtech, which is to improve the quality or the standard of care and lower the costs. Also, there is of course, a clear pattern that our population is getting older and older, which means we are seeing the chronic diseases increase, and 80% of the costs of Healthtech comes from chronic diseases, right?
It does. I had a conversation not too long ago with the chief medical officer from a large enterprise healthcare system. And I thought his take was really interesting, Mike. Exactly what you said, right? We all know that a huge majority of the costs are driven by chronic diseases. No question. And you see so many technologies trying to improve the outcomes for that chronic disease population, right? We just manage your diabetes or your COPD or your
Yeah.
hypertension better, and we can keep you out of the emergency department. Man, all the money we can save. Problem is, at least according to this CMO, it's at that point it's too late. You're going
Right.
to, and those expenses are going to be incurred. The horse is out of the barn. Spending money there doesn't generate a return the way one would like, for the simple reason that changing behavior is super hard, right? I mean,
Mhm.
chronic disease patients, people, getting them to change their way of life and getting anybody to change their way of life. Anybody just, we all want to go on diets. We all want to lose weight. We all want to exercise more. But how many of us actually do it, even though we know it's the right thing
Right.
to do, right? And same goes for chronic disease patients. So this CMO had a really interesting observation. He said, I asked him, I said, oh, are you optimistic about all these exciting platforms that manage diabetes and hypertension and give you remote data? And so we can intervene. He goes, honestly, I'm not. I'm not, because I don't really think it can move the needle that much. I think we need to spend the money right earlier on in preventing these
Right.
diseases, because you prevent the disease, now you save a ton of money, right? You save the entire cost of care for that chronic disease versus, great, we saved $20,000 because we avoided one emergency department visit in Mrs. Jones last year. Is that really generating the ROI that's going to move that 19% GDP down to 15% or down to 10% and still deliver the outcomes? His take on it was no. If you're not dealing with the preventative side of diseases, you're never going to really move the cost curve, in a meaningful way. And then, of course, there's opportunities, right, for platforms that do that. And we're investors in a company called Wealth, and Wealth is, sort of a patient engagement, patient incentive platform to give people certain rewards for them to engage in healthier behavior, or to quit bad habits like smoking. But they have a very unique approach to that, because the common thing is, great, quit smoking and, we'll give you an Amazon gift card. Well, does that really work? I don't know. I don't think the data backs that up. They have a different approach, which is based on something called loss aversion, where you give people the reward first, and then if they don't meet the goal, you take it away. The psychology of that's been very well validated in the clinical literature, that once people envision themselves, once they have ownership of something, then they're much more motivated to keep it, as opposed to, I'll get something I never had if I do the right thing. So lots of opportunities in the startup and technology world for platforms that can drive healthier behavior before people, before disease states exacerbate to the point where they are very costly to take care of.
Yeah, just to wrap up this segment, there is really something interesting in this space, which is a lot of the people, or of the patients who have chronic diseases, are not able to sign up for a health insurance plan and to have that condition covered. So it's good to see also a movement of health tech companies creating almost insurance companies with their own model, where they will decrease the cost because they know how to prevent those diseases from evolving, and presenting better, let's say, policies or better packages for the ones who are signing up for those insurance plans.
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting trend of startups saying, listen, if we believe in the ROI, if we can save the healthcare provider $5, $10, $15 for every dollar spent on our platform, maybe we should be the ones capturing that economic rent.
Right.
Instead of banging our head against the wall, going through a 12 or a 24-month sales cycle to get a big bureaucratic enterprise healthcare system that, moves at a glacial pace to adopt new technology, in part because they're bureaucratic, in part because people's lives are on the line. You don't change behaviors easily unless you're really confident that you've tested it and it's going to work, and in part because changing behavior of providers is just super hard. So there is this sort of next generation of startups saying, listen, we'll deliver the care ourselves. We see this. We've seen several startups on the behavioral health side saying, listen, we believe that we can engage with patients on our own behavioral health platform and drive down the cost of care. Forget it. We're not gonna try to get contracts with enterprise healthcare systems. We're just going to become the provider ourselves. Now, that's not easy, right? I mean, there's all kinds of challenges associated with becoming your own provider, state-by-state licensing, getting individual payers to pay for your platform. It's a much more capital-intensive process, generally speaking, to become a provider and to compete with, what the folks that were traditionally your customers are now your competitors. Exactly. So it's an entirely different model, but it's a really interesting one, and time will tell if there are opportunities there.
Love it. And let's go into more the operator side and what you see across your portfolio, which is you get in typically at late seed, pre-series A. So what are the common mistakes that you see health tech entrepreneurs do during that stage?
So yeah, sure. I mean, it's the list is actually is pretty long, right? Not surprising, but and again, if folks haven't seen the Dreamit doses, which are something my partners and I do, I think we try to really highlight a lot of those mistakes and best practices. They're short 5-minute videos. I think we have 60 of them now, covering all kinds of topics from fundraising to pitching customers to actually what do specific slides need to look like, because we see these mistakes repeat themselves over. We're listening to over 500 pitches a year, and there's some of these mistakes just you see really on a daily basis. So yeah, we see over 500 pitches a year, and we see the same mistakes over and over again, and that's why we prepared this series called the Dreamit Dose, up to 60 videos now, 5-minute sort of short videos on best practices and mistakes and how to correct those mistakes, more importantly, that we see over and over again. But I would say by far, the most common mistake we see is around the problem statement, not crisply and clearly defining the problem. Who has it? What's the impact and the consequence of that problem, the financial impact and consequence of that problem in a quantitative, meaningful way. And then it's such a simple concept, but it gets missed over and again, which is who pays and why. And it's really surprising how many times that a company will pitch and they'll jump right into the solution, as if we already bought off on your problem. We have this amazing widget and doctors will use it to identify cancer more quickly. And then our AI engine will identify the best treatments. Hold up. What problem are you solving for who? And I cannot tell you how many times we will interrupt the startup early in the pitch and say, stop. I want you to finish this sentence for me. The problem we solve is, now complete that statement. And here's the thing, that's actually not an easy question to answer unless you've done a lot of customer discovery. So that's sort of part two of the mistake, which is how many customers have you actually spoken to? Do you really truly understand standing in their shoes, the problem that you're trying to solve? Because so many times, startups will say, well, that just makes sense, right? I mean, we sort of say that every doctor is going to want one. And we have a sort of a saying in Dreamit, which is, you can point at data, but you cannot wave your hands. Right? Do the work. I remember one of our startups we've invested in, a really awesome company, is called HealthNote. Founder and CEO, that's a doctor. But when he pitched us, it's an awesome platform. It automates data collection pre-visit so that before you go to your doctor's visit, your primary care, your specialist visit, all the critical information about your condition has been collected and summarized for that doctor before the patient encounter. But I remember the founder, Josh, saying, I surveyed 120 doctors when I was thinking about putting this platform together. I really understand. I'm a doctor, but I didn't assume I understood the problem. I talked to 120 doctors, right? That's how you do customer discovery. One, you will understand the problem way better, which will inform, obviously, how your solution tackles that problem. And two, it gives you tremendous credibility when you talk to investors. As soon as I hear you talk to 120 doctors, I'm leaning in because I assume you have a really good understanding of a big and urgent problem. And you wouldn't be doing this unless those doctors told you this needs to get solved. So I would say when we work with a company at Dreamit, I'm not kidding, we spend the first month just tightening up the problem statement, right? And that problem statement, it informs everything else. It informs your messaging around your solution, the value prop, what metrics you're going to measure yourself by, how are you going to generate an ROI for this customer, who are the stakeholders that will be involved, right? You're almost never and you're selling enterprise healthcare, you are never selling to one decision maker, right? You may have a clinical champion, but all the stakeholders, the IT department, the nurses, there's the administrators, the finance, the budgeting, the nurse managers, going to be a lot of people that get involved. As part of your customer discovery, are you understanding their, getting their take on the problem? Because again, can't tell you how many startups come to us and are like, well, and even in the case of HealthNote, Josh, he spoke to lots of other stakeholders. He didn't just talk to 120 doctors. He spoke to the nurses. He spoke to the administrators, got the more global view of, does this problem need to be solved? And the buyers involved, what will they want to see before they'll plunk down their dollars to invest in this? What are the proof points? How will I demonstrate with data and evidence that this is delivering, that this is actually solving the problem? So it is definitely the most common mistake is jumping in, starting development of your platform. It could be, we see it's very common with medical devices, but it's also common with software, where you're just so convinced that you're solving a problem that needs to be solved that you don't pause to go talk to a bunch of customers and hear the problem. Because one of our partners, Todd Dunn, who leads innovation at Atrium, one of his concerns, one of the issues that he has highlighted with startups is they come in and they just assume we have the problem. Right? You just start pitching me. You haven't even asked me anything about my problem, my system. You just assume that I have the problem and you start pitching me on your solution. One, it's sort of almost intellectually offensive because you haven't spent any, basic sales, right? Sales 101, understand the needs of your customer. But number two, you need to understand that because if you just start pitching your solution, it's like throwing darts at a board. You hope, you're throwing stuff against the wall and you hope that something in there resonates with the needs of your customer. But, you've sold to one healthcare system. You've sold to one healthcare system. If I've sold to Atrium, the value prop for their system for the same platform could be very different than if I've sold to a small community hospital.
Right.
And so understanding those specific needs, the specific needs of specific customers is really, really important. So yeah, then I would say other sort of common mistakes that startups make, maybe on that short list, underestimating how hard it is to get commercial adoption, understanding even, okay, great, I got a great understanding of the problem now, and I'm excited that I think my solution will solve it. But don't assume in healthcare, no one will beat a path to your door. Trust me, no matter how awesome your solution is, the we build it and they will come attitude is never how it works in healthcare. Even if you have the cure for cancer, they're not going to beat a path to your door, right? You have to really understand how your solution fits into their system. Workflows are super important in healthcare, right? I always joke, you could have the cure for cancer, but if you add 10 minutes to somebody's day, not going to use it. They're already working 12-hour days. They're already exhausted at the end of the day. You're a provider. Your mission is to get your head, between two fluffy pillows at the end of the day, right? It's not to find the next awesome innovation that adds more work. That may be better, maybe not, but it takes. So I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, they just underestimate the time and the friction and the process it takes to get a healthcare system to adopt something new. And then that cascades into the next problem was just, it's just, you're not only underestimating the sales cycle, but then that means you're underestimating the amount of capital and the time it will take for you to get those early proof points and put yourself in a position to raise more capital and to scale, right? I have a venture capital friend of mine always says, multiply whole timeline and cash flow projections by pi.
5. Wow.
By pi.
Pi.
3.1459, whatever.
Exactly.
That's as far as I remember it.
By pi, yes.
And you know what? I look back at all the startups I've been involved with. I think I've served on a dozen boards now, and it's not far off. It really isn't. It always takes longer. It always costs way more. There's always something that happens. It's the unknown unknowns. There's stuff that will, who predicted the pandemic, right? Well, for some companies, that was a tailwind. For a lot of companies, it just launched them into limbo. Like they were moving along with a hospital. They were going through the trial to purchase phase. They were going through, stop, freeze, don't go any further. We're not even talking to you until we figure out how we're going to manage this pandemic thing, right? Nobody could predict that. Well, you're sitting around burning capital for the next 12 to 18 months while you're sort of stalled here. So assume it's going to take longer, assume it's going to take more capital than you think it will, and raise more money than you think you need. Always take money when it's available to you. Again, talking to a startup right now that I'm involved with, and they're like, well, we don't really want to raise more than this because this capital is dilutive. I'm like, if you have an opportunity to get more capital, take it. Don't even think twice about it. The dilution at the end of the day is not going to matter. If you succeed, you will do well. But if you run out of money, the consequences will be dire. Rule number one, the top job of every single CEO is to keep the company well capitalized. That is job number one. There isn't even a close second. Because if you get close to sort of that cliff of running out of capital, the consequences of down rounds, repricing stock options, letting employees go, it completely changes, the landscape for your startup. So it's a situation you never, ever, if you get nothing else out of this podcast, never, ever, ever, ever run out of cash. Rule
Right.
number one, do not run out of cash.
Love it, and it's especially relevant in the times that we are living today, right? With some uncertainty in the markets.
Yeah, no, market conditions have changed dramatically in the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, it was really interesting times. The sort of, and we all know the Rock Hill data, how every year was another 20-30% increase in digital health investing.
Yeah.
That the market has shut down considerably right now. We're seeing term sheets get pulled. We haven't seen that in years. We're seeing rounds get repriced. We haven't seen that in years.
Yeah.
So it's right now, it's a tough time to be a seed Series A. That said, we have startups in our portfolio raising just closed rounds at great valuations, great investors. So really good deals with evidence and traction behind them and great management teams. They're still raising capital.
Yeah.
But the earlier stage stuff has gotten a lot tougher. And we were routinely seeing startups saying, oh, we're a $20 million pre-money valuation. We're a $30 million pre-money valuation.
Mm-hmm.
And for us as a seed Series A investor, we're very valuation sensitive. We have to be, or our model, our thesis just doesn't work. So for us to invest in a pre-revenue company at a $30 million valuation is really tough. And you roll the math forward, that's not going to generate the returns that we need to be a successful fund. But we would routinely have startups saying, well, you don't invest on us at $30 million. We don't care. We got 10 other investors down the street who are willing to come in. So nice talking to you. Those conversations are not happening anymore. It's amazing how there's been a sudden increase in humility among startup founders because market conditions have changed and raising capital has suddenly, I mean, it is kind of, it's really surprising how quickly the market changed in terms of access to capital and valuations.
It's incredible. The good thing that's what you said, staying positive. If you have the team, if you have the metrics, there is still room to move forward. If there is no metrics, no team, no vision, no clarity, that would be very, very difficult in good conditions, and in bad conditions, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, and it really, it also raises the bar in terms of, as a startup, if you're out raising capital, to really have that full business model, all the aspects of the model carefully thought through and vetted, where I think before there was capital coming in from less sophisticated investors who thought, well, this seems like a good team. This seems like a compelling problem to solve. We'll invest without having fully vetted all the aspects of the business model.
Right.
Another common mistake startups makes, very common mistake, not a clear go-to-market strategy. When startups pivot, it's almost always, not most frequently, it's because the go-to-market strategy had to change. The way they were pitching the problem wasn't resonating. The way they were pricing the platform wasn't resonating. The customers they were targeting weren't the right customers. The messaging wasn't right to those customers. Those are the common pivots around go-to-market strategy. So that's a place where, and unfortunately, a lot of founders come from technical backgrounds. So, they can program great, and they really, they're very skilled in terms of the ability to advance the technology, but they don't come from a marketing background where they're really understanding what a go-to-market strategy actually means. And I would say 6 or 9 months, you probably get away with that and still get your company funded. But today, investors are going to drill down, and they're going to drill down hard. And if you don't really understand your go-to-market strategy, probably you're not getting funded.
Good points, and we would love to cover much more of those mistakes or lessons learned. But again, I really recommend you to go into Dreamit doses. All of this stuff that we've been discussing about in terms of the common mistakes are there, very well explained. I really love the videos that you guys put together, and congrats. And please, to our audience, go to the Dreamit website or to the YouTube, and you will see the doses that I'm still also myself consuming and learning from them. And we get into the final segment of the show, which is a quick question and answer. So if you'd have the opportunity to have a conversation with Adam at the beginning of your journey as investor, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
Yeah, I guess one, find what you're passionate about. When I got out of school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I started out in management consulting, quickly learned that wasn't my cup of tea. So you're much more likely to succeed if you jump out of bed in the morning and you're excited about what you're doing. Healthcare is obviously a great place because, at the end of the day, hopefully we're making people better and we're improving the human condition. I think that's why most people in healthcare do what they do. But, my first job out of school, I was hitting the snooze bar 3 times in the morning. I was not excited to go to work. So in hindsight, I realize it's just the quality of your life and your enjoyment will, is tied to your career, and it's tied to your work, and your identity is tied to your job. So do something you really love and you're passionate about, and that you may have to do some experimenting to find what you're passionate about, but get on a career trajectory that aligns with something that you really care deeply about, where you feel like you're on a mission to improve the world through whatever platform or product that you're working on. And then the other piece of advice was given to me by a very renowned venture capitalist. Her name was Brenda Gavin. She started 3 different venture funds in Philadelphia. Super smart, very successful venture capitalist. And she taught me the 7 most important words in business. And the 7 most important words in business are: never underestimate the importance of being liked. Let that settle in for a second. Never underestimate the importance of being liked. And I cannot tell you how many times we talk to an entrepreneur who acts in a way that's just not likable. You come across not likable, you come across as uncoachable. When my partners and I talk to a startup for the first time, inevitably the first comment after we hang up the call, in the Zoom room, the first thing somebody says is, "Oh, I really liked her."
Exactly.
Or is, "I didn't like that founder at all. Did you like that guy? I did not like that guy." And guess what? You're probably not getting funded. It's a very sort of subjective kind of, it's just not somebody I want to work with. That's just, the guy was a little abrasive. He was a little obnoxious, probably not coachable. So likability is just, it's sort of it's this unstated critical characteristic, but
amazing.
People who are likable are so much more successful than people who are not likable. And it's just, we see it every day with entrepreneurs. I mean, we have founders, there's certain founders that I say have the gift of likability. You want to help them. Just, when your friends call you and you need something done, you'll do anything for your friends, right?
Exactly.
When someone calls you don't like and they start asking you for favors, probably not so much. I think that's something that, I wish I had a better appreciation for when I was younger.
I can relate to. And what are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
Well, I mean, it's a little cliche, but it is true. I mean, family first, right? That's always, way more important than, always balancing work-life balance is really important. But I am fortunate, awesome spouse, awesome kids. My kids are out, started their own careers, just crushing it right now. So, that's a little bit cliche, but it is true that far and away. Career-wise, I think, the platforms I've worked on have made people better. Like, they have improved the human condition. I've worked on a bunch of different medical devices, cardiovascular, orthopedic devices that actually did generate better outcomes, made people recover from diseases or injuries more quickly. And at the end of the day, that's the yardstick by which, I think most health tech entrepreneurs will measure themselves. Some of them were financial successes and they delivered good returns to the investors, and some of them were failures. And it, again, it's cliche, but it's totally true. You really do learn more from your failures than you learn from your successes. So, fortunate or unfortunate, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot. And along those ways, the other thing that I guess I've really that makes why I'm passionate about my job is that I get to help the next generation of entrepreneurs navigate around the minefields that I drove into when I was a young entrepreneur. Because I didn't really have a lot of good mentors or advisors when I was starting my first couple companies. So I made practically every mistake you can make when I started those companies. So bringing that pattern recognition and helping sort of these entrepreneurs stay off the rocks, or seeing those icebergs in the distance that they can't see yet because they haven't been through this before, that's just a really rewarding part of of what I do every day. And then seeing those companies flourish, nothing better than seeing a founder with just a handful of employees go from a very early platform to a scaled successful business. That's there's financial rewards for that, but the personal rewards are incredible.
Love it. Definitely. Purpose and legacy. Worst advice ever received?
The worst advice. Been given a lot of bad advice, but I will circle back just to try to make it more relevant to the startups out there.
Yeah.
Where I've made mistakes is on advice around go-to-market strategy, because everybody on your board, captains of industry, will have ideas on what your go-to-market strategy should be. And honestly, if you get that wrong, it's a huge setback for a startup. And where startups frequently get this wrong is they start out with a consumer go-to-market strategy and think, oh, well, that'll be, forget the healthcare systems. We'll just start getting people to, our platform is so awesome. Our app is so amazing. They'll just download it in the App Store and they'll pay, $15 a month to use it. That strategy generally doesn't work. There's a great article by Paul Yock, founder of Stanford's biodesign program, that he wrote in Startup magazine about the fact that 60% of startups that start as direct-to-consumer eventually pivot to a B2B business model. So while it's super tempting to think, oh, we can get to the market quickly, we can just start generating revenues, it's really hard to acquire, to cost effectively acquire consumers. And one of my startups, we had an outspoken board member for a platform, and this board member was like, you got to go direct to consumer. That's where we're going. I wrote the biggest check. I had a different view of that, but hey, this was a smart, experienced investor, and we followed the path to direct to consumers in unmitigated disaster. It really set the company back. So, you got, if you really believe something, you got to hold your ground, right? Even if you're getting advice from board members or investors, if you're getting guidance or advice that you don't agree with or don't believe in, as the CEO or founder of the company, you need to step up. You have to support your argument with evidence and data. So do the work. But yeah, I think that's, that was some of the worst advice I got. And I share that because I see it over and over again with different startups who I can't even tell you how many startups pitch us that say, they start their pitch with, well, we started with direct to consumer, but now we're B2B.
Right. That's true. Great advice for the worst advice. Thank you, Adam. And quick resources, favorite book?
Endurance, The Incredible Voyage of Ernest Shackleton, which for those of you who don't know, Ernest Shackleton, back in 1916, attempted to be the first explorer to circumnavigate the South Pole.
Wow.
He got shipwrecked for 500 days. And so it's just an incredible story of creativity and survival and figuring out, which is really like the journey of a startup, right? Because truthfully, Ernest Shackleton had countless near-death experiences when the ship got stuck in the ice and they had to get creative, and it would have been so easy for them to just give up and assume they weren't going to make it. And every single man on that ship made it back alive after being shipwrecked for over 500 days. I mean, it's crazy that they survived that. So it's a great book on leadership and overcoming adversity and how do you stay positive when the odds are just completely stacked against you. And it happens to be a really fun read too. So very entertaining book to read. But for entrepreneurs, you'll totally connect with the challenges that Ernest Shackleton faced.
Great one. Thank you. Favorite movie or series?
Favorite movie? Yeah, I'm gonna go maybe a little non-traditional here. But
I'm
my
curious.
favorite movie is actually Scarface. The story about Al Pacino plays a drug dealer in the 1980s. But it's just an entertaining movie. But again, there
It's
are some really great lines in that movie that are directly applicable to startups. And I mean, there's a line in that movie where, he's talking about a guy he does business and he says, I never liked him and I never trusted him. Now, the guy happens to be hanging out of a helicopter with a chain around his neck. But it's back to never underestimate the importance of being liked, right? We all want to
right.
do business with people we like. But anyway, it's a fun, entertaining movie. It's a great way to sort of disconnect from all the chaos and the challenges of running a startup and just be sort of mindlessly entertained, if you will.
And to wrap up, the favorite podcasts, excluding this one.
Oh shoot, you. One of my favorite podcasts is How I Built This. It's by Guy Raz.
Yeah.
There's so many good ones in there. Two of my very favorite podcasts that he did on this topic. One was on the creation of Dave's Bread. I'm not sure how many of your audience would be familiar with Dave's Bread, but in a nutshell, Dave's Bread is a very sort of high quality, mass produced bread. And how he started that journey, he was an ex-convict actually. Started working at a cousin's bakery and had this idea, like, why can't you get decent bread in the grocery store? The bread we get here, this white, it's called Wonder Bread, this white bread, it's just absolutely the worst. And so the way that he had the vision to create this, eventually they got bought out by private equity. And now you literally find this, they started out, they got into Costco, but now they're in virtually every single grocery store. But the emotional journey that he went through, and he co-founded with his cousin, he and his cousin actually don't even talk anymore. There was such a rift between the two of them, even though this was ultimately, I think they sold the business for over $300 million to private equity.
Wow.
But he talks very openly about the challenges. And then the other one that's really good is about Dyson, and how he talks about, and we had this idea for a whole different kind of vacuum cleaner, that he went to like every vacuum cleaner company and said, hey, I have a great idea for a vacuum. What do you think? And he got turned down by everyone. And they get turned down because everyone said, well, we need to sell bags, right? We have vacuum cleaners. We make money off of the disposables, the bags. If you're creating a vacuum cleaner that doesn't have a bag, we're not interested.
Right.
So, just really interesting insights that entrepreneurs have into opportunities. And oftentimes when everybody else is telling you no, that's sort of when you actually might be on the right. When the incumbents are telling you no, that probably means you're on the right track.
Love it. Adam, thanks so much for making the time. It was really an extraordinary experience to have you on the show. Thanks so much.
No, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much for the invitation.
And to the community, as you see, we keep bringing you the best of the best to help to make your life a little bit easier, starting up and scaling up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.